I know I might be a little bit late to the news, but realignment rumors are getting absolutely crazy, and that's mostly because realignment itself is also getting crazy. Recently, we saw UTEP leave Conference USA to join the Mountain West, so there's a bunch of possibilities now for whatever team Conference USA will bring up from the FCS to replace them. But something that was very crazy that came up recently was a proposal for a 70-team super conference that would completely separate itself from the rest of college sports as we know it, and it could really be the huge change that everybody's been waiting for, whether they want it or not. In today's video, I'm going to be looking at the 70-team Super Conference proposal, what it means, who wants it, and who might be kept in or out. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you didn't support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and talk about this 70-team Super League. So let's just start from the very beginning. There's been concepts of a Super League formed in college sports over the last few years, ever since Oklahoma and Texas left for the SEC, and Oregon, Washington, USC, and UCLA left for the Big Ten. Those two conferences are now considered the top two conferences in terms of media contract payouts due to the levels of college football that are being played in them, and honestly they're the two conferences calling the shots right now. There used to be 6 power conferences back in 2011 with the Big East, but then it collapsed and became the Power 5. And now the Pac-12 is done, so it's really just Power 4. But as we look towards the future, you could make the argument that the Big 12 and the ACC have already been left behind, and that's just a Power 2, which a lot of people are thinking will merge and create a Super League. There's no reason for Oklahoma to be playing South Carolina in a conference game, and really, there's definitely no reason for UCLA to be playing Rutgers in a conference game. But recently, Ross Dellinger of Yahoo Sports has reported that there's a push within some circles for 70 or so teams to take their ball and leave the NCAA entirely when it comes to football conferences, and maybe even all revenue sports in general. According to Dellinger, the group is made up of mostly former executives from Disney, who own ESPN, and their proposal involves taking the top 70 schools from the 4 existing power conferences and having them only play games against each other and nobody else, and expanding the playoff field and making sure that the powerhouse teams play against each other more often, with the hope that it'd be a $9 billion boost to the college football atmosphere in general. It's being called Project Rudy behind the scenes, and college athletic directors are already excited about it. Not only would it be really valuable for those teams involved, but it would create some really fun football games like Georgia-Ohio State every season, making it feel like the playoff pretty much each and every week. It's been in the works for a while. According to ESPN in late September, media representatives from the Big Ten and the SEC met in Nashville to discuss a scheduling agreement between the two conferences that make them play each other more often. This would lock out other conferences from scheduling teams in their non-conference games. That would mean rivalry games like Bedlam between Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, the border war between KU and Mizzou, and the Palmetto Bowl between Clemson and South Carolina wouldn't be able to be played anymore under the new model. Other proposed super conferences have been gaining steam as well. The Athletic's Justin Williams reported a huge Super League proposal from the College Student Football League on October 1st that featured a Power 12 with 70 schools in it, and then a group of 8 that had 64 schools in it. Divisions were attempted to have been organized based on historic rivalries, geography, and the playoff system, and it was definitely unique. The league would have a 13-game, 15-week schedule featuring 5 division games and 8 non-divisional games, with the opportunity for a group of 8 schools to have their own playoff and opportunities to play teams in the upper levels as well as sort of a relegation system. But there were plenty of problems in the proposal, and it got shot down pretty quickly. One of the issues was that Ohio State was in a division completely separate from Michigan, which would make some scheduling hard. Other schools like Colorado were in divisions separate from their rivals, with Nebraska, Colorado State, and Utah all being in different divisions than them. But there were also issues with the group of 8 as well, as Army, Air Force, and Tulane apparently being relegated to FCS status essentially. But this wouldn't be a Super League. The CSFL even stated that they're more concerned with it being a better way to regulate conferences. Instead of multiple conferences, there'd be 2 divisions, and scheduling would be done far in advance based on rivals and history, even between bigger schools and group of 5 schools. That is not exactly the case with this new Project Rudy that's being discussed though, and people in power already like Project Rudy way more than any of these other ones because it guarantees a clear cut from the rest of college football and essentially guarantees that the bigger brands make more money. Miami Hurricanes AD said, quote, "Of course, of all the deals I've seen, this one makes the most sense. Conferences are kept intact, commissioners still have an important and valuable role, and there's an ability for schools to make increased money from bigger matchups and more playoff games." A big part of Project Rudy, like I said earlier, was the push for more high-profile games in the non-conference slate, like what the Big Ten and SEC met to discuss together. But Project Rudy would have it so that the teams inside the conference wouldn't play Group of 5 or FCS teams at all, eliminating bye games against smaller teams. That means we would not get games like Colorado State, Florida State North Alabama, or Michigan App State anymore. This would end up having disastrous effects on athletic departments for those FCS or smaller FBS schools who made a ton of money from those games. For example, not only did New Mexico State beat Auburn last year, but they were paid $1.85 million to do so, which was a huge chunk of the revenue the Aggies pulled in from their football program last year. But refusing to play these small schools means that the bigger schools involved will be making way more money than they're used to. Ross said, quote, "The project will result in an increase of media and sponsorship revenue to about $15 billion over a 12-year period, alongside over $5 billion immediately from the interest given from private capital lenders, so the absolutely huge amount of money being handed out to those schools. But not everybody would get paid the same, since it would go into a tiered payment system where schools would get $130 million in year 4 to $250 million in year 12 for the top earners, and then to $60 to $110 million for the teams in tier 2 and $30 to $60 million for the teams in tier 3. Conference and the schedule layout would be determined by relegation, but that doesn't mean that Iowa State or Missouri will be playing Georgia anytime soon, because the project suggests having 8 permanent members of Tier 1. This is a move presumably to placate the biggest brands in the sport, so no matter how badly a school like Alabama or Texas does from season to season, they would never fall out of Tier 1. Obviously, ADs in the SEC and Big Ten are all in favor of this, because not only does this increase their payout per school immensely, but they already would rather play the biggest brands in the sport instead of playing local colleges, because that would mean they make more money and they'd be able to create their own governing branch almost completely separate from the NCAA. This means they could decide what works and what doesn't under recruiting and NIL rules, as well as being able to easier petition the government for rule and law changes. Right now, the proposed system is still illegal under a current congressional rule, because Project Rudy would have every college bargain under a single entity instead of their own, which would violate the Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961. Obviously, this creates a huge problem for the smaller schools in the FBS, because the proposal only includes 70 teams. They haven't officially listed which 70 teams will be included, but considering the fact that the SEC and Big 12 each have 16 members, and the ACC and Big 10 each have 18 members, if you include Notre Dame with the ACC, that means there are a total of 68 schools already considered power schools, and assuming every power school would make it, only 2 more teams would get the call to join, and the common theory is that those 2 schools would be Washington State and Oregon State of the Pac-12, since those both are rivals with Washington and Oregon, who just left for the Big Ten. So earlier I mentioned that the College Student Football League came up with a list of 72 schools that would make it. Let's go ahead and preview those, because I'm sure you guys are curious about that. So in the Eastern Division, we have Boston College, Maryland, Navy, Notre Dame, Virginia, and Virginia Tech. In the Southeast, we have Florida, Florida State, Georgia, Georgia Tech, Miami, and UCF. In the Mideast, we have Cincy, Penn State, Pitt, Rutgers, Syracuse, and West Virginia, so a lot of Big East schools there. In the South, we have LSU, Arkansas, Houston, Memphis, Mississippi State, and Ole Miss. In the Plains, we have Colorado, Kansas, K-State, Mizzou, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma State. In the Great Lakes region, we have Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Michigan State, Northwestern, and Purdue. Then to close out the last 36 in the Midwest, we have Iowa, Iowa State, Minnesota, Nebraska, Ohio State, and Wisconsin. That seems a little bit odd. In the Texas division, we have Baylor, SMU, TCU, Texas, Texas A&M, and Texas Tech. In the Carolinas, we have Clemson, Duke, NC State, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Wake. In the Southwest, we have Arizona, Arizona State, Cal, Stanford, UCLA, and USC. And then in the West, we have BYU, Oregon, Oregon State, Utah, Washington, and Washington State. And finally, to wrap everything up, we have the Mid-South, which includes Alabama, Auburn, Kentucky, Louisville, Tennessee, and Vanderbilt. That is the list of 72 teams. But there are some other schools that could have a say in that final spot, and honestly, I can see it becoming an arms race for schools to grab those last 2 votes. UConn has a say if Project Rudy decides to split for all sports, not just football, because of how strong of a basketball brand they are. All their rivals are in the Big East, which would make leaving a little difficult, but if the alternative was to watch all their peers leave and form a super conference without them, they might want to make the decision to pour money into football so that they don't get left behind. The same thing could be said for the Memphis Tigers, who honestly might be the best Group of 5 school available for all sports. They compete really well in football and basketball, are in a metro area, and they could edge out Washington State and Oregon State if the committee cares more about potential money than historic rivalries. Schools with great football histories like Boise State and App State could make the final list as well, and schools with high ceilings like San Diego State, Colorado State, and Tulane could make some noise as well. But if you're a fan of a Group of 5 school in general, this is probably terrible news for you, since that means your athletic department wouldn't be able to face those big name schools anymore, and they wouldn't even be willing to schedule you. Those schools might have to cut some sports programs just to keep up, and honestly, this might just finish the FBS as a whole, since I can see a lot of those conferences just merging with the FCS, and even some of those smaller Power 4 schools shouldn't feel safe. What if the new mega conference sees Memphis and UConn more valuable than K-State or Wake Forest? Do Vanderbilt and Rutgers get a pass just because they're rivals with a bunch of other Power 4 schools in their mega conference? That I don't know. Obviously, this would be huge for everybody involved and could create some really good football games, but I honestly don't know any more about realignment. I kind of just wish everything would go back to the way it was a few years ago, since that was the college football I grew up on. But what do you guys think about this proposal? Do you guys like it? Do you guys hate it? What do you think? Be sure to let me know down below. Leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.